Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche. Events in the Central African Republic, one of the world's most unstable countries, has taken different and surprising dimension. The country's interim president, Michel Djotodia, stepped down along with his prime minister, Nicolas Tiangaye, after a two-day regional summit in Chad. Djotodia became the country's first ever Muslim leader in March 2013 after a coup led by the Seleka rebels. Since then, the country descended into turmoil amidst violence between Christians and Muslim militias, forcing over 1 million people to flee their homes. With Michel Djotodia's resignation, what does the future hold for the Central African Republic? Share your thought with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take this report now, and Africa Today will be right back. Thanks for joining us.
Michel Djotodia was born in 1949 in the country's remote, neglected and largely Muslim northeast. His rise to power began after he led the Union of Democratic Forces for Unity into a coalition with other rebel groups to form Seleka, which spearheaded the offensive to overthrow Francois Bozizé. But before the rebellion, Djotodia had played various political roles in the country and region. He had served in Ange Felix Patasse's government as a civil servant in the Ministry of Planning after studying economics in the former Soviet Union. Djotodia also worked in the Central African Republic's foreign ministry and was named consul to Inyala in neighboring Sudan's Darfur region. He was said to have used his time there to cultivate alliances with Sudanese militias and Chadian rebels in the area. Michel Djotodia soon became the #1 enemy of the government of Francois Bozizé, and he used the newly formed Seleka rebel to fight government forces. According to rights group Amnesty International's 2009 report on the Central African Republic, Michel Djotodia and another rebel leader, Abaka Sabone, were detained without trial in Benin for more than a year before being released at Mr. Bozizé's request in the hope that it would end the conflict raging at the time. This was probably Mr. Bozizé's biggest political mistake, as it opened the way for Michel Djotodia to play the dual role of peacemaker and rebel leader. A truce was later agreed between government and rebel fighters at a peace meeting in Libreville, where a deal was struck for a unity government, and Michel Djotodia became the country's Minister for Defense. His relationship with Francois Bozizé soon became frosty, and his Seleka group asked him to withdraw from the unity government. Seleka then launched a rebellion in the country that ousted Francois Bozizé in March of 2013. Since then, Seleka are blamed for the escalating violence, brutal killings, looting and other atrocities. Now the end has come for Michel Djotodia's led Seleka in the Central African Republic. Djotodia finally bows to pressure from the regional government in Central Africa, calling for his resignation. There is now increased apprehension and uncertainty about the future of Central African Republic, where the conflict has forced more than half of the country's population out of their homes. Thousands have also been killed, and there is also a worsening humanitarian crisis. Femani, TVC News.
All right, glad to have you back. This year, the Central African Republic has arguably been in the news more than any other crisis-stricken nation in Africa. The UN had earlier warned of a looming humanitarian disaster, but no one saw Djotodia's resignation coming, and now it has happened. To discuss the developments in the Central African Republic on Africa Today, we have Biodun Sholmi, an African affairs expert, and he's been following affairs in that country. It's good to have you in our studio today again.
I'm pleased to be
You're
here.
welcome.
Thank you.
All right, and then we have Femi Akonde, TVC News international correspondent. He's been in the Central African Republic several times. He's here with us today again. It's good to have you with us today. Thank you. And later on the show, we'll be linking up on phone with David Smith, a security expert and director of Okapi Consulting in South Africa. Now, let's start it this way. Djotodia resigns. It's a big surprise. Did you see this coming?
Oh, yeah. In the last couple of days, in the last 3 days, there have been huge discussions among several regional powers, around what should happen. Don't forget that the key to unlock no matter the settlement reached in Central African Republic, without the involvement of the neighbors and without, resolving the issues between the political elites, nothing would happen. So it was clear that because Djotodia was increasingly seen by many people, to represent the violence being unleashed by the Seleka group, in Central African Republic, that at a point you'll have to pay the price. The second factor also is because he was seen to have betrayed Bozize, considered by some that he actually betrayed the former President Bozize, who he removed from office. And Bozize was from the Christian majority, 75% majority, and Djotodia from the north, from the 25% minority. And therefore, the vast majority of the elites, particularly including the Ngbaka group, along the riverine area, felt he has to pay the price. So there had been calls for its removal, but largely ignored due to the domestic situation, but those issues were picked on. Strikingly, he resigned at a point in time when violence has actually simmered, but because it's part of the long-term settlement or medium-term settlement, to settle the political risks in Central African Republic, at a point, Djotodia has to pay the price.
All right. Now, you were there, you spoke with citizens, you spoke with the ordinary citizens of the country. Is this what they want? Are they happy? Did they see this coming? Were they calling for his resignation? Would they be happy now?
Yeah, I can tell you authoritatively that the citizens in Central African Republic would jubilate over news of the resignation of President Michel Djotodia. Over time, they had always called for his resignation because he is the villain in the whole of in this crisis, because the Seleka rebels have perpetrated evil atrocities and carried out violence and massive killings in that country. And Michel Djotodia, as the head of the Seleka rebels, was the one that is seen as being responsible for the atrocities of the Seleka rebels. And oftentimes they have always said it that before they can even come before they can even sit to talk about peace or to negotiate a way out of this crisis, Michel Djotodia must be out of the way before they can come Christians, Muslims, or warring ethnic factions or armed groups in the country, before they can sit and dialogue. Michel Djotodia must be removed from the political scene in that country.
Okay. Now, some persons, when Djotodia came, there was some form of jubilation and so on. It seemed like he was going to be the Messiah. But why did it become so difficult for him to handle the situation in Central African Republic?
Yeah, for some reasons. When Michel Djotodia came into power, he rode into power on the backs of the French military intervention and Chad, the neighboring republic. And when he came into power, it held so many hopes. One, because he was the first president, from a Muslim, from the north. And secondly, because he had exposure, he studied in Russia, and people thought maybe with his role in the economic life of Central African Republic, he was at a point in charge of the planning ministry, and they felt maybe it brought a lot of hopes, because the real issues is not actually religion, in Central African Republic. It's about competition for resources, and the fact that the North was neglected for a long time. There were also other issues around the border area. There are national boundaries, but people don't hardly respect them because they cross the boundaries easily. They are badly monitored, and in search for resources like water, it's as bad as that. And lack of infrastructure, insecurity of life and property, military intervention, including hijacking food meant for civilian population supplies. So there are so many other issues which religion is just coming into it recently. It's not, the issue there is not about religion. There are so many issues, and therefore Djotodia held so many promises, but unfortunately the violence, unleashed by Seleka group overpowered him. Yeah. He was unable to rein it in.
It's okay. Now, joining us from South Africa is David Smith of the Okapi Consulting. David, it's good to have you join us on Africa Today. Now, Michel Djotodia has resigned as Central African Republic's interim president. What does this imply?
Well, it means there's nobody in charge in the Central African Republic at the moment. Not that anybody was really in charge. Well, he was the interim president because Djotodia was in his compound most of the time, ruling over not even the entire city of Bangui. There is still a national transitional authority in place, and the head of the authority, a fellow by the name of Alexandre Ferdinand Ngende, has 15 days to come up with a new name to replace Djotodia, and that name, I imagine, will have to be somebody that the Chadian president next door, Idriss Déby, approves of. And interestingly, the fact that Déby managed to convince Djotodia to step down, not that Djotodia had any choice, was probably because he offered him some kind of carrot that we may not know about in public for a little while, and that carrot may have been the possibility of allowing him to run in elections when elections are held somewhere between now and early 2015.
All right. Now, you said that no one is in charge. Let me use your word. No one is in charge of the country now, as it is. Will this turn things for the worse or turn things for the better?
Well, I think it could only be better. As your correspondent, Femi Akande, said, I think very correctly, there's jubilation not just in Bangui, but in most of the country. Djotodia had very few supporters. There's been trouble in the Central African Republic for decades. The country's been in a state of crisis virtually since the time of independence, even pre-independence. You know, what they have on the ground at the moment to ensure that there's some sort of stability are two things. There's the African Union-led MISCA mission with roughly 4,000 troops on the ground, and about 800 Rwandans will be joining them very shortly. And as you know, there's also the 1,600 French soldiers. There's a possibility that the European Union may add to that number in the not-too-distant future. But in any case, this is the de facto government running the country. It's a security system that's running the country right now. Not enough people on the ground. You asked, is it going to make things better or worse? It can hardly get worse. People are happy that Djotodia is gone, but if the Transitional National Council doesn't come up with somebody soon to replace him, and somebody that the people of the Central African Republic feel is reasonably qualified for the job, then we may have to revisit the problem again in 2 weeks' time.
All right. Now, with this resignation, what does it hold for the Seleka rebels?
Well, Seleka was a very loose organization of rebels that came together with one purpose at the beginning of last year, actually the beginning of the previous year, and that was to remove Francois Bozize from power. When they did that, their raison d'etre ceased to exist. And that's one of the reasons why Djotodia had such a big problem. When Djotodia, even from the day after he took power in March 2013, when he asked the Seleka rebels to disarm, to go into the garrisons, into the army camps and lay down their arms, they didn't listen to him because they didn't see him as a real leader. Seleka exists only in name now. It's really just a bunch of armed groups that have regional warlord leaders, and they're answerable to nobody except for a few local chiefs.
All right, I've asked my guests in the studio this question. Let me ask you too. Why did it become so difficult for Djotodia to turn things around in the country there?
Well, frankly, I don't think he ever had a grip on turning things around. Like the problems of running the Central African Republic manifest themselves right from the day he entered the Ledger Hotel, which acted as his presidential palace from day one. He didn't have control over the country. He was in charge of a group of rebels who were predominantly Muslim, and not that religion was the main problem, as your studio guest said a few minutes ago. There's never been a big religious conflict in the Central African Republic. The big problem is the Seleka rebels came from a remote part of the Central African Republic. It is not just a different religion, but it's also a group of people who speak a different language from the majority of Central Africans. When they came into Bangui, they didn't speak the national language Sango, they didn't speak French, they spoke Arabic, and they couldn't make themselves understood. For many of the Seleka rebels, coming into Bangui was the first time they'd ever been in a city. They were also joined, and this is what really made people in the Central African Republic angry, they were also joined by a lot of rebels from neighboring Chad and from Sudan. So that most people in Bangui and the rest of the Central African Republic felt as if they were being invaded by a foreign force, even though many members of that force were from a distant part of the country up in the northeast.
All right, David Smith, thank you very much for joining us on Africa Today. Now, in 2013 coup in the Central African Republic, it did not only bring Djotodia to power, but also saw rebels carry out atrocities against civilians. Reports from Bangui, the country's capital, say that there was street jubilation on the possibility that the terrible security situation might change. But now, how soon can one say this will take place? And how much and how long will it last? We'll take a short break and the program will go on. Stay with us. Right, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on Africa Today. Michel Djotodia seized control of Central African Republic in March 2013, only to see the impoverished country turn towards anarchy and sectarian bloodshed. Many say Djotodia has been under pressure to resign in recent weeks. Now, Femi, let me come from this perspective of atrocities. You met with people and so on. What kind of atrocities, what did you see? What kind of atrocities did you see? What we will call atrocities?
Yeah, there were sectarian violence carried out by some elements of the Seleka because they were disbanded and then now referred to as ex-Seleka. So the ex-Selekas attacked churches, Christian communities, or people perceived to belong to another religion other than the Muslim minority. These ones became easy targets for the Seleka rebels. Children were also brutally murdered. Sexual violence also became the order of the day. A lot of men, able-bodied men, were also seen as enemies or people that in the near future might take up arms and fight against the Seleka. So the Seleka carried out a kind of serial violence from one town to the other, from one community to the other. They enter into a community, they kill people they randomly kill people, and from one community to the other. That was their way of suppressing the people and bringing them under the authority of the Seleka government of the day in the Central African Republic.
Okay. Now, with this kind of atrocities, will it warrant the attention of the ICC?
Yes, but will it stop the problem?
Okay.
No, ICC intervention is not the solution. What we have in Central African Republic is a phantom state. You know, what the ICC, International Crisis Group, ICG, described as a phantom state. You know, it's no more a matter of a failed state. This is a country where today the state, the government alone does not have the monopoly on the legitimate use of weapons. So virtually every groups have their own weapons and they control the area and they enjoy support and they are considered to be legitimate, you know, by their own people. So it's no more a matter of a failed state. What we have is a phantom state. Central African Republic needs to be put together. And you can't resolve this because this is not about religion at all. This issue of Muslim or Christian is just coming in. It's just something being introduced recently due to the activities of the Seleka. And we need to understand that many of the people committing the atrocities today are people, you know, from the war zones of Darfur in Sudan and Chad. They are not even Central African Republic, you know, brutalizing their own people, but they have actually mixed up, you know, with the local rebel groups due to, again, what is considered to be the blood national boundary, largely undefined, largely unpatrolled, largely unmonitored. So therefore, you have people moving in and out easily. And for some reasons, those with religious motive have now managed to move in, join the Seleka group, and perpetrating these atrocities. What we usually see in Central African Republic is mutiny and coups, and they always have that from time to time because of the competition for scarce resources. The only reason why the 2007 intervention of the EU forces, when France managed to persuade the EU, to get involved in the issue of Central African Republic, the only reason why it failed is because they failed to address the issue of the resources. And until they help develop the infrastructure, deal with the issue of illiteracy, and help rebuild the economy of Central African Republic in an equitable way, in a way that all the different people can find expression and can find a meaning to their life wherever they live. Central African Republic, I'm afraid, will continue to, gyrate in this kind of violence. So it is not enough to say ICC. ICC can come in and take out those who are there today, but what happens to those who will succeed them?
But quickly, let me ask, who should be held responsible for all this trend and atrocities in the Central African Republic?
It's also partly France. It's partly France because when you go back into history and see how the place evolved, when France came into, France colonized Central African Republic, following the 1884-85, Berlin Conference. When France moved in, what they simply did was to develop a core of the elite around the Ngbaka people, which they are the people living along the riverine area for obvious reasons because of trade. And then what we ended up having is the first president, Barthélemy Boganda, who led them to independence, happens to, it was Ngbaka, it was from Ngbaka ethnic group. The second one, David Dako, from Ngbaka ethnic group. Emperor Jean Bede Bokassa from Ngbaka ethnic group. And therefore, France supported those past presidents in a way that they were able to, harness resources, largely meant for the whole country, for the elites in their own areas. And France has always been intervening. Even if you look at how Bozize got into power, it was French intervention. So the attempt by France, seen by many now, France is now trying to involve the international community in a problem largely that France should be held responsible for, to give it a measure of international acceptance. It's something which I find then despicable. France should take full responsibility for helping Central African Republic, to be a country, to put it all together. And that has to be done with a lot of resources pumped into that country to ensure that all the different areas are developed. Go into history. There is no time France is not involved in the issue of who rules in the direction of Central African Republic. The other factor is the military. The military has taken it upon themselves to be the sole decider, as far as Central African Republic is concerned, on the direction of Central African Republic.
All right, but before I ask Femi this question, but the point that if France refuses to take responsibility for this, who should be held responsible?
Well, at the end of the day, Central African Republic can't be left to continue that way. There is a moral responsibility on the international community to come to the aid of Central African Republic. Okay. It's a moral duty which has to be done because you can't leave Central African Republic to collapse the way it has collapsed. We can't, it's not sustainable. It will have impact on other countries. Don't forget you have Chad, you have Sudan, you have Congo, you have Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay. You have South Sudan also bordering a Central African Republic.
Okay, it's all right. Well, Femi, you were in the Central African Republic. Trying to compare the two, Francois Bozize on one hand and Michel Djotodia on the other hand, citizens, what did you hear them say? Did they prefer Francois Bozize or they preferred Michel Djotodia?
Well, a lot of them preferred Francois Bozize because he belongs to the Christian majority in that country, while Michel Djotodia is from the Muslim minority. And they feel with Francois Bozize's government, they had a kind of inclusion. They were carried along in the scheme of things. They had adequate and equal representation in the government of Francois Bozize, even though it was still a military government. But the fact that that military government is led by a Christian, they were comfortable with that. But Michel Djotodia, the first Muslim president and also from the minority to rise to power in the Central African Republic, to them they feel this is totally unacceptable and something that should not even have happened in the history of the Central African Republic.
But if they had preferred Francois Bozize, they didn't fight to get Djotodia out.
Well, everybody, Francois Bozize, Michel Djotodia, and even the past presidents, they got there by organizing a military coup that helped oust their predecessor. So it's not really for the citizens to decide who gets into the government, who remains in
maybe
government.
The citizens were helpless.
It's a helpless situation for them.
Okay. Yeah. All right, thank you very much for coming on the program today. Thank you very much, Femani Akonde. Thank you. And David Smith from South Africa, who joined us earlier on. Right, it is believed that Michel Djotodia's departure now leaves the country in the hands of a weak transitional government with so much uncertainty. The National Transitional Council, led by Alexandra Ferdinand Ngwendet, now has 15 days to choose another interim president. For a country with a long history of coups and dictatorship, the people in the heart of Africa can only hope for the best. That's our package for today. We'll come your way again. I am Mike Okwache, and remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.